Good afternoon. Welcome to the Dorset Historical Society, our second, third Thursday lunchtime lecture since we restarted after COVID. We are going full blast back into our programming. We have a speaker today who I'll get to in a moment, but also just to let you know about some other things that are coming up. Tonight at 6 o'clock in Delwood Cemetery, the Dorset Players and the Manchester Historical Society are putting together a thing where people go from grave to grave and get life stories from dead people, basically. And that's always a very popular thing. I will be the second tombstone people visit, Ogden Pleisner. So that should be fun, as long as I can remember my lines.
I just want to make an unsolicited comment. We went to this 5 years ago, when it was last held. It was one of the best. We're summer residents of Vermont, but it was one of the best things we have done. It was so impressive. So if you haven't gone,
yeah, I'm going. I'll be there.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Where is that date publicized? We missed that date.
I don't know. I just know I'm supposed to show up at 5 o'clock.
So it is
Yeah,
an amazing
so.
event.
Yeah. And I understand 200 people have been there in the past.
oh,
Wow.
Yeah.
It's the coolest thing.
And then Sunday in North Bennington is the 250th anniversary celebration or commemoration of the Breckinridge standoff, something that is considered the first military action that created the state of Vermont, Republic of Vermont, the state of Vermont. And that's from 1 to 4 in North Bennington. And then next month we'll have another lecture, but I'm not going to talk to you about that because I'm going to talk to you about our lecturer today, who is Don Trachte Jr., this gentleman right here, and he will be speaking about some lost and found paintings. He is the son of Donald Trachte Sr., who is a cartoonist, most famous for the comic strip Henry, about a bald little boy. I remember growing up reading Henry in the newspaper and always never understanding why he was bald. I'm not sure I still know, but it was a distinguishing characteristic of him. And being the rebellious type, Don did not become an artist. He got into aerospace industry instead.
That's right.
But then got more into art after his father died and found out all about what he's going to talk to you about today. Now, I'll tell you what he's going to talk about today, but he's going to talk about it. So, please,
Okay.
Don Trachte.
Thank you. Thank you. We need to turn on the projector here, right? You know the key button. We did rehearse this a minute ago, so let's see if it works again. Something's coming up here. There we go. Okay, so, well, thanks for coming out on a sunny day here. I wish we could have more people, but that's okay. We've got a nice group. I'm calling it The Tale of Two Paintings, and a Norman Rockwell painting not known to have been missing was found. And so it is kind of an interesting sleuthing story that I'll get into. I want to give you a little background, though, to this story. And I'm going to start with art theft because it is a missing painting story. And art theft is among some of the questions in discovering missing art. I want to point out a book that I just love. It's called The Museum of the Missing. And it's by Simon Hout. And to me, it's fascinating. And it kind of leads to this story because there are questions like what happened to this painting. But one of the things that captures my interest in this book is he talks about a museum of the missing. And I just want you to imagine all the theft and all the thievery that goes in the art world. And he talks about artwork that's, he says, imagine a museum filled with all this missing art through art theft, art forgery, and so forth. And if you don't mind me, the Museum of the Missing would hold perhaps 150 Rembrandts, 500 Picassos. You could stroll through the Renaissance galleries to admire Raphael's, Titian's, Da Vinci's, and Durer's, Rubens, Caravaggio's. The Impressionist section would include works of Renoir, Degas, Manet, Matisse, Pissarro and his friends, and sometimes students Cézanne. And you'd skip through your way through history of the Western art via Vermeer and Van Gogh, Constable, Turner, Dali, Miro, Pollock, Warhol. Just imagine, this is stolen art. It's missing. And I just find it fascinating. So it's a great book to kind of wet your whistle on some missing stuff. And of course I had a lot of thoughts along this line too, because I had a point where I didn't know what was really happening to our artwork. 30 years ago, the Isabel Stewart Gallery in Gardner Museum in Boston was ransacked by some thieves, and they took Vermeer's The Concert and 12 other treasures, including 3 Rembrandts. It's just astounding. And what's so annoying is that these thieves come in and they don't even take the frame off. They just cut out the picture and roll it up, and out the door they go. And there was an interesting TV program fairly recently about the Stuart Gardner Museum and theft. And as far as anyone knows, it was just some thugs from Boston. And later they were just capturing that artwork to maybe get out of jail free or something like that. It's criminal. And of course, 1994, thieves broke into the National Gallery in Oslo and stealing the screen, the famous screen. In Zurich, Switzerland, and of course, they're always wearing ski masks. And if you live in Vermont, why are they always denigrating ski mask? Why isn't it something else? But here they are. They 4 paintings by Cézanne, Degas, Van Gogh, Manet, and it's just astounding. In this country, we have, lost art and so forth, but I think that it's not as prevalent as it is in Europe, it seems. I may be wrong on that. But on to art forgeries. And here's an interesting story written by Edward Dolnick and The Forger's Spell. Now in this case, it's an art forgery story, and what's interesting is it's about this Hans von Meegeren of Holland, and in World War II, he was forging things like Vermeer, and he was exchanging this with Hitler and Goering. And in a forgery case, you don't know if it's been missing, particularly if that artwork goes back 400 years. So these are unknown things. So anyway, I think suffice it to say, the reason I'm just doing that is to say a lot of thoughts were in my mind 15 years ago during my story. Provenance is a word that's used most prevalently by curators, and the provenance of a painting is merely the birth certificate, if you will. And in this case, here's an example of Sotheby's catalog. And the provenance of the painting that I'm going to talk about is very simple. It says Donald Trachte, 1960, acquired directly from the artist by descent through the family to the present owners. That's it. But look at other artwork. Here's one that is by Edward Hopper, but that list of provenance is long. But that's how these museums and curators and so forth tracked it. That was important, the provenance. Well, it doesn't always work. And you'll see also, provenance doesn't always play the part it's supposed to. So authentication is actually more important. In fact, Sotheby's has a whole department now on authentication. They want to know what was the canvas, what was the ink that was used, or paint, what's the substrate, what kind of brushes. They have to investigate that because Sotheby's has run into cases, and Christie's as well as other auction houses, that they've been fooled, and they have to track this down, because when you're exchanging millions of dollars, it's kind of important. So the provenance and authentication, I just want to drop that on you. Now, let's get to the characters of the story. This is my dad, and he's drawing the character, this bald-headed character, and I'll tell you in a second why he's bald. But my dad started at a very young age. In fact, my dad was 16 years old, and he was at art class, and he was taking art from Carl Anderson in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, Carl has this great, colorful history. Born in 1869, 3 months before Abraham Lincoln was shot. And I just think it's just incredible connection to history. You know, we think about our connection, and here's my dad working for a man who was born when Lincoln was still alive, basically. And so our connection in that respect is pretty close. I think that what's remarkable is this man was in his retirement years. He's in his 70s, and one evening came up and he sketched this character, Henry, and the class liked it. And the class said, geez, that's terrific. Why don't we see some more? Well, with that, Carl developed a sketch on the left, and that was the original sketch that created the first cartoon that was sold to the Saturday Evening Post. Why is he bald? Well, in Madison, Wisconsin, there were a lot of German and Norwegian kids, and they're all running around. In the spring, in the early summer, the mothers would shave the kids' heads. And they're all towheads anyway, they're all little blonde kids running around, and so they all look bald. And so it was very common to see bald-headed kids. The other thing is that, why the horse? Well, in 1931, there were all dray horses all over the town, delivering milk, ice, you name it, whatever it was. And so it was quite common. So horse scenes, whatever it was a hit with the Saturday Evening Post. And it sort of blossomed from there. And for the next 2 years, my dad dragged his portfolio over to Carl Anderson and said, I'd like to work for you. I'd like to basically be your apprentice, if you will. And Carl hired my dad at 16, and the two of them collaborated on artwork. So for that went on with the Saturday Evening Post. It was first published in 1932 and continued for 2 years. When William Randolph Hearst in 1934 happened to be traveling in Europe, and he discovered the Henry cartoon, and he wired back to New York and said, get Henry. And with that, a man from the Hearst Press took a train out to Wisconsin and found Carl Anderson, and they signed a contract in 1934 for a cartoon strip. And of course, the Hearst Press was enormous at that point. It was just really mushrooming in that business. And it was published in more than 400 newspapers worldwide. So it was quite a success. It was a great success for Carl and a great thing for my dad as a young man, able to travel with Carl and so forth. Well, Carl and my dad, you might say, collaborated with this cartoon strip from 1934 to 48, and Carl in his last years died in 48. And my dad made this tribute in a Christmas card to Carl, be of good cheer. He shows his glasses, his pipe, and so forth, and Henry respectfully looking on. It was a great relationship that my dad had with Carl, and it lasted. Well, after 1948, my dad was pretty much free to leave Wisconsin. Carl was established there, my dad felt it's important to remain in Madison. But by 1950, my dad discovered this house in West Arlington. Now, this was owned by another Saturday Evening Post illustrator named Meade Schaefer. And Meade, I'll explain in a second, was an extraordinary artist in his own right. His daughter Lee lived right here in Manchester and just died about 2 weeks ago. She was 95, I think. But beautiful woman, beautiful family, and a great history of that Arlington artist group. My dad continued to draw the cartoon strip from 1948 to 1994. So he complained a lot about the syndicate, the Hearst Syndicate, which owned the Henry cartoon. But I said, well, look at it this way, you've had 60 years to draw Henry, so you didn't have a bad life after all. But he did do a lot of muttering and sputtering with that. This picture was taken in a studio in West Arlington at the Mead Schaefer house, which we own. Let's talk about Norman Rockwell for a second, because he's the other character in this story. Norman, born in 1894 in New York, has a fantastic history as a rascal living in off Amsterdam Avenue in New York. And, wonderful stories about his growing up. Norman mocked himself. He was a skinny kid, said he had too large an Adam's apple. He was just, but he loved to draw. And if you really study artists and cartoonists, the same theme reoccurs. Draw, draw, draw. They all say that, and even Norman Rockwell. So, and he was the ultimate drawer, if you will. I call this the golden age of illustration and cartoons. Now, it's really funny because Norman Rockwell would take exception to that. He felt in 1915 the golden age of illustration was done. And so it's kind of funny. I would love to be able to sit with Norman Rockwell and say, no, Norman, you carried that golden age of illustration all the way up to the 1960s. But suffice it to say, these newspapers, the Pulitzer newspaper and the Hearst newspapers are battling each other, and they would pump out hundreds of pages in a newspaper, just phenomenal. And they relied on illustrators and cartoonists at that time. The whole age of cartoons were developed. I'm going way off story point here, but I just find the whole thing fascinating. I think I want you to kind of grasp this village of Arlington and what was going on. Norman moved to Arlington in 1939. He was living in New Rochelle, New York, and he moved up basically with his friend Mead Schaefer. Mead was an avid fisherman, and that was probably one of the reasons why Mead wanted to move up. Norman said, well, it sounds good to me, but I think Norman was looking for an outlet for himself. He wanted to get back to the country. He loved that. He had been a city dweller, but he loved getting to the country, and so that was his desire, and he found Arlington. I claim that his major works were done in Arlington, and I'll prove that. He produced 322 Saturday Evening Post covers. That doesn't even count for his advertising, his calendars, and all the other things that he produced. Just an enormous talent. If you look at a Saturday, or if you look at any, let's say, Saturday Evening Post cover, let me come back to that point in a second. I just want to point out, this is his house in West Arlington. The two houses that you see up there in the kind of, it's a poor picture, but I love the picture. This was Norman's house here, and then beside it was an identical home. This originally was built like 1820 or something like that, and whoever owned that house built the identical one for his daughter. So, and then here's the old church in West Arlington. There's a schoolhouse here, and of course the West Arlington Green, where they had square dancing every Saturday night from 1948 on. So it was a very desirable area. Here are some of the other Arlington artists that my dad associated with in that area. Gene Pelham on the left. Gene Pelham was the photographer for Norman Rockwell. John Atherton, fabulous artist, unfortunately died too young. He was 50 years old. He was fishing up in Canada and died of a heart attack. Mead Schaefer, of course, fabulous artist in his own right. And George Hughes, who produced over 225 Saturday Evening Post covers himself. So altogether, those gentlemen produced over 276 Saturday Evening Post covers during that period from 39 to 53. So, and 53 is the year that Rockwell moved out. Most all the others, Pelham continued to stay, and then George Hughes to stay in Arlington. Okay, this is the first post cover that Norman did in Arlington. And what I was going to tell you before was that when you see a post cover like this in a piece of artwork, quite often you're going to see 9 or 10, there will be sketches, charcoals, color proofs, everything behind that. So it's not just this one painting. Imagine just a row of everything from the sketch to the idea and so forth. And Norman was a real diligent about creating that idea of interest, and he worked hard at that. And he said he beat his brains in to get that idea and capture it so that it would stick. He also minimized the characters in all his illustrations. But just to give you, a quick briefing, here's the famous Willie Gillis series that he did during World War II. I think it's kind of interesting. This is how Norman portrayed world soldiers in World War II. He created the Willie Gillis humorous character, and I think that was, and by the way, that's Lee Schaefer over on the far left over here, and she did a lot of modeling for Norman. So we have that series, of course, Rosie the Riveter. These are all done in Arlington, and this became the most famous, and perhaps this sold for just under $5 million, and it kind of was a big breakthrough for Norman's artwork. And this took place in, not sure the year, but it was the first one to sell more than $1 million. So it was a big breakthrough. And I know a lot of critics would say, well, it's because of the American flag and this and that. But actually, it was just an evolving, eventual history that Norman's artwork was going to become quite valuable. Of course, the Four Freedoms done in Arlington in 1943, that has a whole story on its own. It's wonderful art, and freedom of speech on the left and freedom of religion on the right. He felt the best about those two paintings, using again Arlington models and locals. There was criticism about freedom from want on the left because the turkey was too big and all this sort of stuff. And keep in mind, these 4 paintings were picked up by the government and duplicated and shipped all over the world. We felt that, or it was felt that Norman had captured what Four Freedoms were all about. And it really derived from the Four Freedoms speech that Roosevelt had given in 1941. So, anyway, these are good. Hello.
Just scooch through.
Sure.
I'll be right back, John.
The Homecoming Marine in 1945. And these are just great examples of the artwork done in Arlington. And I think you're probably familiar with a lot of these. The Christmas Homecoming, December 25th and 48. Here's the Shiner. Mary Whalen lives up here in Mount Holly, Vermont, and that's my dad as the principal in this one. Here's the Saying Grace was voted the #1 painting by Reader's Digest in 1957. And what I love about this painting, by the way, this broke a record in dollars. I think it was $46 million. It was sold at Sotheby's just a few years ago. But what I love about it is this man right here lived in a no-floor shack across from the covered bridge down in West Arlington. His name was Bill Sharkey. And I'm thinking, here's Bill Sharkey living on potatoes literally in a one-room shack. And he's in one of the most famous paintings. But that says something about Norman. He was looking for that character, the character face, the hands. He loved painting the older people and the young kids. The middle age, not so interesting, but when you got old, you had some wrinkles and you had double chins or whatever, he liked that. So I think it just expresses a lot about Norman, and he was not class conscious. He just loved those faces. He loved to portray the face. Okay. The last painting that Norman did in Arlington was this Breaking Home Ties, and this is the painting we're going to talk about today. And of course I love it. I think my dad loved it. And one reason is that the character is Floyd Bentley here. He was my neighbor, and Floyd was a Yankee horse trader who lived in Sandgate, and he farmed. He didn't own a tractor. He farmed with horses, and I think he just had, what a great character he was. He was just honest, and he was like a second father to me. Here he is modeling for the picture, and of course in those days Norman used photographs or pictures. Here's his son Tommy. Norman used his kids to model in lots of pictures. Eventually, in the Saturday evening final version, he used a man named Robert Waldrop, and Robert was a Boy Scout, and he found him at the Jamboree in New Mexico, and that was 1954 was the publication. Okay, here are the artists, another shot, and I think the reason I like to show this is that there was this camaraderie of artists. This is Norman here, my dad over here. This is Vic Donahue, who was a cartoonist and an artist, became a Western artist. He moved to Tucson, Arizona. And here's George Hughes. And this is Frank Hall, who was kind of a character in Arlington, did a lot of MCs. And we had things called the Arlington Benefit. It was Arlington Street Fair. And believe it or not, Norman and certainly George would offer up paintings, and they would say, yeah, raffle them off for a buck a chance, you know. And so you get a Norman Rockwell, or in fact, I know a woman has a wonderful painting. She lives in Pownell. She has a wonderful painting by George Hughes. I mean, I would love this thing, and to think that her mom paid a buck for the opportunity, it's incredible. But the whole point here is, again, I want to point out that they didn't work in a vacuum. You know, these men collaborated ideas and criticism. Well, in 1962, at our own Southern Vermont Art Center right down the road, Norman came up and gave an exhibit. Well, interestingly enough, in this exhibit, and you can see this is a copy of the original flyer, you can see, I'm sorry the words aren't crisp here, but here's Breaking Home Ties. So we had Breaking Home Ties, Price on Request, and he had, I think that's a Checkers. He had a whole host, about, what have we got, 31 paintings there, 33 paintings, something like that. I can't even read it from here. But the point is, he came up to Southern Vermont Art Center, hosted this show, and of course, with great fanfare. This is 1962. Well, my father worked up the courage to approach Norman to buy Breaking Home Ties, and I didn't find this check until just a few years ago, but it verified the date, July 2nd, 1962. The price, $900, and the story was that Breaking Home Ties had traveled all over the world, and my father declared it will not leave the valley again. And well, probably a short time later, it did leave the valley. Norman begged to have the painting travel to Russia and Egypt in 1964. My dad was beside himself. He couldn't believe that he bought this wonderful painting, and now it's going to go off to Russia and Egypt. I think the letter returned when my dad got the painting back. Norman says in his letter here, "Dear Don, have your original back. It was the most popular of the picks in the show. They were offered $35,000 to you for it. They said they called you. You must be crazy not to sell it, but I adore your loyalty, as ever, Norman." And it's an astounding thing to go from 900 to 35,000 by itself in just a couple of years. But it also showed the solidarity my dad had in respect for Norman. He was not going to give up this painting under any circumstances to anybody. And that's an important note to follow. By 1970, my dad was on a committee at the Southern Vermont Art Center, and he came up with his own. He and Gene Pelham were committee chairman, and they said, what are we going to do for what's our next show? And they came up with self-portraits. So all the artists at Southern Vermont had to come up with a self-portrait. Well, my dad chose this idea, and of course he replicated Breaking Home Ties, and of course he featured in here an oversized Henry cartoon character. He put himself in as the old timer, and instead of the hats, he has a palette. He kind of hammed it up here with he put in State U, he put in property of Norman Rockwell. He has the Trachte Ranch up here. So he has some humorous thing. Copyright, King Features Syndicate. That's the syndicate that my dad fought all those 60 years. And they would nag him and say, you must put a copyright on everything you produce. So he put this great big oversized copyright feature on there. So it was a gag, but it was kind of extraordinary because the detail of the truck and all the background and everything was just so alike. It was, to me, I thought, geez, my dad's a cartoonist. He's not a fine artist, but it was, I thought, pretty extraordinary. Here's some of the sketches that he did that I found in preparation for that painting. And so he was sketching out that idea in 1970. Well, a couple years later, by 1973, my parents were going through a divorce. And now, I think that what's interesting is that, keep in mind, my dad's attachment to this Norman Rockwell painting was enormous. And I think my dad worked this out. I think, how would you divide a painting? Well, there's only, you'd sell it as one way, or you just cut it in half. That's all the options you've got. He was not about to part with it. My dad cleverly developed a collection of 8 paintings and said, well, we can divide 8 paintings, because now we have a collection. So, one partner takes one half and the other half. Well, as it worked out, in this divorce decree, my mother had 5, which were already in her house anyway, and my dad had 3, including the Norman Rockwell painting. But the deal was that the children owned all the paintings. They said, what we'll do is we'll gift the paintings to the children right now, and here's the divorce decree. I had an exhibit down in Huntsville, Alabama, and before I went, I said to the framer, I said, I'd like you to frame the divorce decree. She said, I've never framed a divorce decree, but here it is. And what's interesting about it is it lists out the 8 paintings right there. Gene Pelham, Rockwell, Schaefer, Webb, geez, I'm sorry, I can't even read my own writing, or I can't read this. Hughes, and Eric, and Weintz was the 8th person. So that was 1973. These are the 5 paintings that remained in my mom's house. So as far as I knew, for the next 30 years, these were 2 Gene Pelham paintings. Here's the Meet Schaefer painting. Here is the Lee Eric and the Virginia Webb. Lee Eric was from Arlington, Virginia Webb from Manchester. They owned the Weathervane Motel for years, but she was quite an accomplished artist and contributor to the Southern Vermont Art Center. And going back, I want you to remember the position, I can't go back, the position of those paintings, those 5 paintings, just mentally capture that. And here are the three that my dad retained, was the Norman Rockwell, the George Hughes painting, and then the Claire Wines painting. So he had those three, my mom had the five, and life went on, everyone was happy, and we went on. Well, my dad, in 1974 now, a year later after the divorce, built a studio up on the hill in Sandgate, and he really created his own domain there. And what was interesting is that all of his artwork was stuffed in the basement of that studio for a few years, and we called it his dungeon. And how he lived there, it was probably like the base of this building right here, but it's just stuffed with artwork and so forth. And why it didn't get spoiled or damaged, I have no idea. Well, let's move on to what happened now. Let's fast forward almost 30 years. And we get to a point where I felt my dad was aging to the point that I needed to do something with the Rockwell painting, particularly, if not the other painting. So I got the right idea. Let's send it down to Stockbridge, Massachusetts. They were running a thing called the Arlington Year Show. I thought it was appropriate. Everyone's all excited about this. And so that's where we sent the painting. Well, it didn't take long. Within a couple of years, artists and critics were questioning this painting, Breaking Home Ties. And so we were getting rumors that said, something's wrong with your painting. And of course, clues began to emerge that maybe there was something haywire in this painting. Of course, I wanted to deny all that, because I didn't want any evidence that there was something wrong with the Rockwell painting. In 2005 now, about 3 years later, my dad died in 2005. And so what happened was at the service, I remember taking some paintings up to the church and had them on display. When we returned from the church, we were putting things away, and I began to discover some other interesting clues that emerged, and I'll show you those in a minute. But I want to introduce this man. His name is John Howard Sandin. Now, John was the first man to walk into the museum in Stockbridge and say, that's a fake, that's a replica, that's not a Norman Rockwell painting. Well, of course, the museum was stunned. How could someone, this is, the provenance of our painting was perfect. It went from Norman Rockwell to my dad. So end of story, that's the provenance that proved it. And well, he was indignant, and he declared it a third-rate replica. Not only that, John Howard Sandin wrote 7 letters to the museum. I didn't know it at the time, but he had written 7 letters to the museum, and he was always gracious to the museum, but he said, how could you be hanging this replica? I don't understand it. What's wrong with you? And so he was quite perturbed. And here he is, when he first went to be, you could see he's very unhappy. He's not happy at all. And there's our painting. And he's cross, you know, he's cantankerous. Now, I never met John until just a couple of years ago. And there's a little story with that, that it was fun. And, but here's some other, I want to get back to the clues. Not only did we have John Howard Sandin who said, hey, this is a replica, but now we have this clue. This is one of the paintings that was hanging in my mom's house. And this is a gallery called Illustration House out of New York. And actually, Roger Reed and his dad are authorities on Norman Rockwell and illustrators. That's what they collected. Well, they said, could we borrow this painting for an exhibit in New York? And I said, certainly, I'll snap a picture and send it down to you. And I did, and it was one of those terrible pictures that you get flashback and so forth. And they said, as it turns out, in this letter, they said, as it turns out, we don't really need the painting, but we think that something's wrong with this painting. And I thought, what do they know? They're in New York. We knew the artist. We knew what was going on. And, well, they determined that something was haywire in this painting. And in their letter described that maybe Meach Schaefer had come back and doctored up his own painting later, which can happen by artists. Well, that was a theory, but it was a clue. And it didn't go in my thick head at that time, but it was a clue that I have to look back on. The other thing I mentioned, going to the church, bringing back some artwork from the church, I discovered one of these paintings was hanging on the wall, my dad's studio. The other one was hidden in the closet. And I looked at my two brothers and my sister and I said, why would crazy George Hughes make two identical paintings, particularly these paintings? They weren't really my favorites, but why would he do that? I remember when George Hughes gave this painting to my dad, George was a very jumpy guy. He said, I'm so proud of it. He said, I painted the whole thing with a putty knife. But as I look now, of course, I think it's extraordinary. But the point is, here we had two duplicate paintings. So that was in my brain in 2005. So now these clues are gathering, but I'm still a little bit unsure, and I want to be defensive about anything wrong with our painting. Okay, my dad died in 2005. Now we're in January of 2006, and I decided to go to Illustration House in New York. And I said, and they sat me down and said, we think this is the original painting. We've been to Stockbridge, we've seen it, but something's wrong. Someone has repainted over parts of this painting. So I grasped onto that. I said, okay, that's the original painting, but maybe maybe when it traveled to Russia, maybe when it went to Egypt, you never know. Quite often, if a painting is traveling and there's damage, Norman would say, just fix it. And they did. It's extraordinary, because you'd never do that today. You wouldn't fix a Picasso or Rembrandt or anything like that. Now, by February, at the same time, I called Sotheby's looking for help. I said, and fortunately, I didn't get them while I was visiting New York in January. By February, Sotheby's was on my case. Don, we could sell your painting, and it would be a hit, and we think this market's good, and so forth. Well, I said to Peter Rathbone at Sotheby's, I said, how would you authenticate the painting? He said, but that's ridiculous. The provenance of your painting is perfect. There's no requirement for authentication, see. I said, okay, how stupid of me. But you see, I knew we had some issues, and I wasn't about to divulge to Sotheby's that I had some issues in my own mind. Later in February, my brother Dave found two photos in the studio, and that began a discovery story that I think got us on our way. He found these two just ordinary photographs, and my brother looked at it more exacting, and he saw some subtle differences in these two photographs. And we looked at them, we blew them up, we did all kinds of things, but basically this is what they looked like. There were some subtle differences as to the background and so forth, and this clue began to emerge more blatantly. Each night my brother and I would talk, and we'd examine one image versus the other. If you notice on the left, this image, the face looks a little different here than this side. And so I began to come up with some theories as to what is going on. Well, one theory that I had was, of course, in negatives, you have a sequence of the negatives, so you know what the negative count is. So I said, well, it would make some sense that maybe the original got spilled on or something. Maybe my father tried to doctor up that painting. Well, the negative sequence was reversed in that scenario. So that kind of blew that theory out of mind, but that's what I was thinking of. And it was that he had made that original and doctored it. So I said to my brother, okay, this is my sketch pad. We're talking every night. And I said, what are the possibilities? Number one, there's no change. That that our eyes are seeing a change in colors, but it's just our imagination. Nobody really knows. Number two, maybe conservation was done. Maybe upon return from Russia. Maybe it was sent to someone to conserve the painting. Maybe that was done. Number three, I clung to the idea that maybe my father had an accident, maybe something spilled on the painting, and he had to make that repair. Or number four, heaven forbid, Dad made a copy. I mean, I couldn't even imagine. But it had to be a possibility out there. Well, in the spring of, in March of 2006, this is a full year after my dad died, I said, okay, let's take Breaking Home Ties and send it back to the Art Conservation Group in Williamstown, Massachusetts. And we want to have them re-examine this painting. They had already had the painting. They had cleaned it 2 or 3 years before. Well, the letter came back, we have your painting here in the lab, very clearly by Norman, from the bluish underpainted outlines to the lighting, the brushwork. And they said, we've had many Rockwells here, and I can verify that. If you go through their conservation lab. And when I read there is no evidence of tampering or repaint in the face of the boy, when I read that, I said, I think we have a duplicate. How could you account for a change if there was no change? And that led me to my discussion with my brother once again, and he began really going through the studio very carefully. One day, he found this large canvas. Unlike my dad, this is a 60-inch canvas. My dad always did smaller paintings, and, well, it was a hint. He also found a shipping crate, which held probably Breaking Home Ties. It was a large shipping crate. Unfortunately, it was empty. Well, my brother walked over to a seam in the wall right along here, this paneling, and he can't even tell you to this day what made him walk over there, but for some reason he put his hand on that wall and it moved. And he thought, well, that's strange. Here, I'll point out, there's a grand piano that kind of takes up all the space in front of that wall. Here's, this is a photographic copy of where I took what I thought was the original painting, and I replaced it with a photographic copy. And then, of course, all the other stuff around the bookcase. Well, when Dave made that discovery, I came down, and now we can see that actually that wall does open. It was unsecured, that whole strip. And it didn't take us too long to realize that if we start to disassemble the bookcase, there were no fasteners. We could take off the top valance board. We could take off this bottom shelf and the bottom valance board down here. And when we did, it opened up this whole pathway to this wall, which then we could say could easily open by sliding this whole panel back over the bookcase. Well, this is my first discovery right here. So I was looking for the Norman Rockwell painting, and oops, I found some other paintings, not knowing that we even had these disappear, because these were hanging in my mom's house. Except these were the originals. My dad had replicated these two, and here they are, the Gene Pelham painting, the Mead Schaefer painting, the one that the folks in New York said, there's something wrong. Well, no wonder, this is the original. And my dad had replicated that. He replicated this one, and of course, behind this are 2 other paintings, and so he replicated them all. And here they are. So here are 5 behind the first wall, and of course, now we're just knocked over. I'll never forget this because when we pulled this wall open, I could smell the waft of oil paint, like original oil paint. It sent me back to my childhood. I remember my dad's studio and it smelled like this. But imagine that these 5 paintings, and all in my mom's house, and here are the originals. And of course, this is where it gets people's blood pressure up, because now some people think my dad's evil because he kept it from my mom, but I think it is part and parcel of the whole story. And of course, it was a good ending because these paintings were in perfect condition and held in this little cache. Now, look at the next wall here. This wall right here is the next one that moves. The first wall, my dad had to build the track out of wood, and it didn't move so easily. We had to kind of pull it and be ginger about it. The next one was hidden, so he could use actually a metal track, and it slid much easier. And so here we go. And of course, when we slide that next wall, we see breaking home ties start to appear, and then there we go. And so this is what we found. Now what's extraordinary is this frame, that this is the original frame. My dad built the frame, the stretcher, and everything for the replica, and he put it in the original frame. So they're interchangeable. You could just take the original frame that Norman built and put the original in, or put the fake in. Take your choice. And so it was quite a discovery. That happened on, it was March 17th, 2006. That's St. Patrick's Day. From then on, I'm called Trachte. But it was a Friday night. And and unfortunately, my brother and I are keeping these deep, dark secrets. And I said, we can't divulge anything. We cannot say a word. Because if this word gets out, and the Norman Rockwell Museum hears about this, they're going to kill us. So, on the following Monday morning, Dave and I are back to the Rockwell Museum down in Stockbridge. And we walked down the hall meeting Stephanie Plunkett, who was the chief curator. Stephanie said, well, welcome, would you like some coffee? I said, no, we want to talk to you in private. And it was one of those long walks down the hall, not saying boo to either one of us. We got into a room and I said, okay, over the weekend we made a discovery. We discovered that the painting you have here is in fact a replica. We know where the original painting is. We know it's in perfect condition. And she said, I better go get the director. And so Stephanie went off and got the director, Laurie Norton Moffat, and we spent about 7 hours sitting there discussing what are we going to do? What is the museum going to do? This is a big no-no, you know, to have a replica in your midst in a museum like the Rockwell Museum. Well, the following day, they came up with a couple of curator helpers. This is my brother on the right. You can see he wrote, the original was Breaking Home Ties. That was written on the original painting. And here they are taking it off the wall. And it's funny because you get so superstitious, because here this thing has been sitting for 30 years, and now all of a sudden, boy, let's not let this place burn down, let's not let anything happen. So it's funny how you view something differently just within a day. Well, they took the painting down, and about 3 or 4 days later, we had a chance to go down to the Rockwell Museum, and they had, at this point, 16 paintings, plus my dad's. So we had a total of 17 paintings there. So we had 8 replicas and 8 originals. And so I said, okay, now we're really going to see the difference. Now we're going to see this is quite a difference. And you know, I stood back and it wasn't that different. I was astounded that how accurately my dad had copied this thing. Well, the museum did an extraordinary job, and what they did is they reframed the original. And what was clever about this gallery, and they kept that in secret. They didn't want anyone to know it, and this was finally exhibited on April 6th, which is about 2 weeks later. And what they did is, on this wall they put the original, and then opposite the wall they hung my dad's replica. And what it does is, keep in mind, we didn't have two side-by-side paintings to look at. And what it made you do is look at the original and turn around and look at the replica. And your memory has to transfer just within a few seconds, and you'd be surprised, you get lost. And we had a number of people, well, we think this is different or this is different. No, it was all the same, so accurate, but it was different in the boy's face. And to this day, I wonder if my dad had done that on purpose. I think it might have scared him to the point that he didn't want to be a forger, but he was a forger. Along with that exhibit, of course, we hung the original of the Henry spoof, cartoon works, and some other things and memorabilia. It was quite a hit in 2006. In fact, if you go down to the Rockwell Museum to this day and ask some of the people that work there, they will tell you, just say, what happened to that famous story about the replica painting? And they'll tell you all about it. And here we are 15 years later, and there is still quite a story down there. However, it's not such a great story for the director. She doesn't take kindly to the story. And Robert Waldrop came up from Texas. He was the boy who was the final model in the painting. He was interested enough to see himself again. The only thing we could really identify were his ears. We see the ears there. Other models in Arlington had modeled for the boy, and they claim to this day that they are the models, but we're pretty sure it's Robert. And then here are some side-by-side tests. And what's interesting is that I gave a talk at the Rockwell Museum, and there was a slide like this, but they reversed it. And so I'm talking, and they had labeled this as the original and so forth. And as I'm talking, I'm saying, something's haywire here. And so once you get used to what the difference is, keep in mind, we were examining in the time of, with our magnifying glass, we were looking at every detail, the polka dots on the tie, the cigarette, everything. And but what we really noticed was the difference in this, the bluish, and see how dark this is in the original, and the lighter color of the overalls, and then of course this boy's face. That became the telltale sign. But there's another thing that I want to point out too. Laurie Norton Moffat, the director of the museum, said, how do I know that this is real? How do I know you don't have something else? And I said, I know this is the original. The reason is that in the original there's a mark down this right-hand edge. And what happened was when Norman sent that painting down to Philadelphia to the Saturday Evening Post, they said, we have to change the format. And so Norman merely unstapled it, laid it out further, and restapled and painted in that edge. So forevermore, that painting has this a crazy little strip down here, which is uneven canvas. You'll never change it. It's like a pink thread that will never disappear. And that's why I knew, and I never thought about it up until then, until after the discovery. So it's unfortunate because I could have saved a lot of heartache, I think, if I thought about it. The side-by-side pictures here. Again, the one on the right was by my dad, the one on the left is the original Rockwell, and you can see the difference in that face. Well, by the end of 2006, there was a lot of pressure to sell this painting. And here we go. So by November, we're down in Sotheby's in New York. If you've never been to an auction in Sotheby's or Christie's, you've got to go do it. It's extraordinary. Paintings just start, they're just rolling at 1, 10, 15 million. It's amazing the bidding that goes on. And here you can see a full gallery, and the original painting comes up on this swivel, and so what happens is that they're hanging another one behind that, and these paintings sell, this sold like in, I forgot, under 3 minutes, to sell. And then they have the large boards here, the video cameras on both sides. And here's the audience. Then they have the auctioneer. This is Peter Rathbone and his assistant. And then there's a whole bank of people on telephones and so on and so forth, taking calls from all over. So it was quite an event. Okay, what did I get first? So when we went up into my dad's safe, and I think this happened way too long after, my brother and I discovered this piece of paper, just yellow line paper, but notice what we're looking at here. Here's a bookcase, here's a Rockwell, 2 Pelhams, Schaefer, Webb, and Eric, and there they are. And we don't know to this day, did my dad do it for himself? Did he do it for us to say, hey, you guys better look around? We have no idea. So we discovered this clue a little bit late. Well, what about John Sandon? He was proven correct, and he was forgiven. He was taken out to lunch by the Rockwell Museum, and then just a couple of years ago, he called me up and he said, I'd love to come up to the studio. I said, sure, come on up. And then I said, well, we could have dinner or whatever. And he came up, and then I got thinking, I don't know this man. I don't know if I'm going to like him. I don't know if he likes me, whatever. So I said to my wife, okay, if it goes bad, I'm going to call you, and you're going to have an appendicitis. And so they drove up, and it was love at first sight. They're wonderful people. He and his wife, Elizabeth, and he's an extraordinary portrait artist. And I would love to have him do a lecture up here in Vermont. He's amazing, and I can tell you more about illustration art than anyone. These are the, this was the original by Rockwell, this was original by Sandon, and the original by my dad. And I meant to make this equal size, but the point is, you can see the difference, and this is really the focus of what was going on in that painting. It took John quite a few steps to do his painting. It didn't happen quickly. Oh yes, then we have the IRS. They had to put their foot in the water, and that's a long story. I won't go into that right now. But suffice it to say, they did a 2-year investigation on this painting. And of course, they were racking up penalties and interest along the way. That was their method. They determined that the painting was not a completed gift because my dad had it behind the wall and didn't physically hand it to us. So you can understand how I feel about the IRS. They completely ignored the divorce decree, which I was banking on. I said, here's an official document. If you don't agree with that, then the divorce wasn't complete. Where do you go with this? But that's fighting City Hall, and I couldn't do it. And after 2 years, surrendered and got a high-powered accountant to help me, and we worked out a negotiated price. And you might say I'm bitter to this day about that. But who can complain? No one's going to feel sorry for me, but I understand. But on the other hand, I think it was unfairly treated. Finally, the secrets is really up to the audience. Did he do it for money? Was it a prank? Was it fear, distrust, divorce, security? What were all the things in his mind when he did this? one thing that you might think about is, if the divorce was settled, why wouldn't he just come forward and say, hey, you know what, by the way, I made a duplicate and here's the original? Well, he couldn't do that, because under oath, he had signed a divorce decree. He would have gone to jail, I think, had he turned around, or some lawyer might have said, no, you were dishonest. And so forevermore, he couldn't say a word, and he certainly wouldn't tell me, because I blab it all over town. I can't help myself, you know. I just would, I just say stuff. He didn't do it for money, because to him, selling a Rockwell was so distasteful. To turn this wonderful painting into dollars is crazy. I don't care if it's $1 jillion, you know. That's how much he loved that painting and that artist. A prank, I think a little bit of a prank when he discovered that he could do the self-portrait. I think hey, I could do that. I think I could do something else. I think he had a fear of losing that painting, certainly. Certainly had distrust for a system that he knew he was, you know, wading into. The divorce, there's no question. You know, that's what prompted the whole thing. But you know, he wasn't, even though my parents went through probably an unhealthy divorce, in that they never spoke again or never could get along, he understood life. And he understood that people move on, things change, people get remarried, stuff happens, people die, whatever it is. But it was the divorce that triggered this whole thing. And security, well, what better way to secure your paintings than stuff it behind a wall and keep it hidden? And, but I leave it to you to have your own thoughts. Thank you.
Question?
Yes.
What about I don't remember the name of the authority in Williamstown? Yeah, that said, no, this is absolutely a Rockwell. You can see the brush strokes, the blue background, whatever.
Right. What happened to her?
Yes.
Sandy Weber. This is so amazing, because Sandy had written that letter, and she's a nice woman. I met her a couple times when they were cleaning the painting in Williamstown, and then she wrote that letter. Of course, I have a copy of it. And when Dave and I went to the museum in Stockbridge, we told them all about it. Well, now, there were 5 people from the museum that came up the following day. It was Lori Norton Moffat, who's the director, Stephanie Plunkett, who's the chief curator, head of public relations, Kim Rawson came up, and then the 2 gentlemen who actually physically took care of the painting. Those 5, plus Sandy Weber. She's the one who wrote the letter, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be embarrassing, you know, because I didn't want to embarrass her. It's like, here, you wrote this wonderful letter that had to be a Rockwell. But she just took it in stride. She loved the story. And she didn't feel like she was eating crow. And I would say that Stephanie Plunkett, who still is the curator there, wonderful woman. If you ever go there, you've got to meet her. She's just welcoming. And those 2 people really grasped the story and wanted to benefit from it. Lori had to report to a board of directors, and that's not easy. You're a director, now you're going to report to a board of directors, and you can imagine these guys are going to pot shot, you know, why did you ever do this? Why did you know? And I can understand that. So it's not a story that she wanted to perpetuate, but it's out there and it's perpetuating. But it is a fun story around that, you know.
Yeah.
I have a question just about, so he obviously copied those 5 paintings, and it must have been when, you know, he was preparing for the divorce and knew that he was going to be maybe dividing up paintings. But how long did it take him, because that was a large painting with a lot of detail. It must have taken a long time. Did people not have access to his studio, or?
Well, that's a good question, because absolutely. In our household, my father had his stuff, stay out of my stuff. And although we could wander into the studio, but we didn't tamper with his things. Now he drilled that into us so intensely that years later, after he died, my brother and I was like, well, let's keep that here. That's where Dad put it. You know, it's amazing how stuff like that gets into your head and you can't give it up. So number one, he was secretive in that respect. But my youngest brother, John, recalls taking a photo of my dad posing for that painting. So in some respects, it was out in the open, but it was for that spoof painting. I think that, how long did it take him to do this? I don't know. But I know that John Sandin took quite a while just to do the head, just to do the face. One reason is that, and this is why John is so wonderful to listen to, because as a portrait artist, the head size was much different in Rockwell's world than it is in normal portrait size. And there's a rule of thumb for the head size, and I know that Rockwell chose a different size. He also used what they called short strokes, whereas most portrait artists use the long stroke this way. It's more sweeping, and he used these little strokes this way. Very time consuming, and I'm sure my dad copied that. You know, he was in the studio enough, and he was, my dad was an interesting character in that he observed and it went in his head and he stored it. And so I know he knew the paint type, I know he knew the brush type, I know he knew the canvas, the underlayment, all of that stuff. And he discussed a lot of that with Gene Pelham. So he was, I don't want to say scientific, but he was in that respect. He understood those details. And then what's extraordinary to me is because when you watch a cartoonist, we think they're just dabbling and scratching around. But really, it's quite a fine art in itself. They're not just scribbles. They follow all the vanishing point of the art. They follow the head size and this and that. They exaggerate the foot, the feet, the hands, the nose, whatever it is. But a lot of it is, in a lot of the cartoonists, are quite good. But it's so far from Norman Rockwell's world where it's almost fine art, see?
So interesting.
I have a comment and then 3 questions that if they're personal, you don't have to answer them. First of all, your father had extraordinary talent to go from a cartoonist to, that is amazing illustration. If he had chosen to do his own original, did
Right.
you think that?
You know, when I saw the spoof, I said, my God, Dad, you can do Norman
Yes,
Rockwell.
yeah,
Just do
yeah.
Norman Rockwell, see? And my dad said, oh, that's just copying. See, for him, it was nothing to copy that. And that's why he,
But could he have done his own? Could he have done original? If you can copy to that
Right.
level, can you do
he
your?
could.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's the original idea. That was it. That's where my dad stumbled, and he couldn't. See, Norman was a great storyteller. Not only was he a great artist, but he was a great storyteller, and that's what captures us. And I think that my dad, I don't know what he struggled with there, because you'd say, well, just do a scene in Dorset here. Just do that, you know. And that's what Gene Pelham would do, or George Hughes, and they're wonderful artists. But you see, they're not known because they didn't tell the story. See, they did landscaping, and I don't know. It's a fascinating thing. But I think, to your point, believe it or not, my brother and I were actually mad at my dad at some point in our discovery, because we thought maybe he had messed it up and didn't even know that maybe the painting had been doctored up. We didn't even think he had the ability to paint like that. And now, boy, did we ever eat crow.
Well, the other 2, I wondered if where your mother, had she I'll just ask real quickly, your mother's, when she found out, or had she already passed away? Number two, did he leave you, other than the yellow legal pad that you just found, a hint? Because these were obviously done for you, in my opinion at least, that you, and number three, did you ever feel that you had come so close to either selling and not finding, I mean, what were the odds that you
Well-
touched that?
Well, three great questions. Number one, remember, we made the discovery on a Friday night on March 17th. The following Monday, we went down to the museum. We were busy all day. The following day, they were up and, I'm sorry, I think I'm off on that. They didn't come up until Wednesday because it was the next day I had to go tell my mom. And I think that Dave and I sat down with my mom and said, we have something to tell you. See these paintings here? Dad did them. and she was 89 at that time. And so I told her, and she said, well, this doesn't surprise me at all. And she said,
That's
in fact,
smart. That's
yeah.
smart, yeah.
In fact, one of the paintings is up in the attic because I never liked it anyway. And I said, if you don't mind, we'd like to collect these so that they can take them down to the museum. So it was the following day after that that they came up and took all the paintings. So that was my mom's reaction. It was, the whole story got published on the New York Times, on the front page, by the way. And I was so disturbed because they had my mother at 98, not 89. I thought, boy, that's really going to go bad. But she was such a great sport through the whole thing. And then, let's see, your second question was to the,
Well, how close you came, were there any, other than the
Clues.
yellow paper, clues to you, and did you ever come close? I mean, you could have sold that.
We
Sold
could've.
a house,
Yeah, that's
Right.
what I mean, and never, ever,
that's right.
discovered it.
yeah,
We didn't find any other written clues.
okay.
So we had what we had, but to your point about selling, along the way, my sister kept bugging me, Don, we gotta sell the painting, why don't you sell the painting, why don't you do this, why don't you do that? I hope she's not here, she's a wonderful woman, she lives right up the road. And, so, with that, Ross Perot had shown a great interest in buying this painting all those years. And here's a funny story. So Ross kept bugging my dad. And my dad, the more people bugged him, the more sequestered my dad became, more, he's reclusive. And so it got to the point that Dad's wasn't even published in the phone book. And so one day Ross called my brother Dave and was looking for my dad. So I happened to be visiting, and Dave says, Ross called. Oh, well, we better tell Dad. So I went up to see my dad, and I said, Ross Perot called. Oh, damn, he says. That was his reaction. He just didn't want to part with his painting. He didn't want to say no to anybody, but it was hard for him. Somewhere in this story, close to before our discovery, I thought, okay, I'm going to call Ross. We're going to sell the painting. So here's me, little me, calling Ross Perot down in Dallas, Texas. What a funny character. And in about 30 seconds, he had me in the corner. And I said, oh boy, I got to get out of this. He's one of the world's great negotiators, right? I mean, this is his business. And he was putting me in the corner, and I realized it. I said, Ross, sorry, but I don't think we're going to be able to do this right now. Well, and he told me funny anecdotal stories along with other things that he'd done. And his middle name was Henry. And, actually, maybe it was H. Ross Perot, remember?
Yeah.
So I don't know why they come up with H. Ross Perot. I'm just Ross. That's it, And he told me a story of riding up the lift at Vail ski area. He said, one time I was riding up the lift with the president,
He says, Ross, why don't you buy this ski area? Ross says, not interested. And the president said, well, how could you make up your mind so fast? He said, because when I was young, I was selling Christmas cards. And I discovered the day after Christmas, you can't sell any Christmas cards. And I'm never gonna be in the seasonal business. And that was it. That's the kind of character he was. Well, when I'd gotten into this little corner with him, and I thought, boy, I gotta get out of this thing. You know, this is like negotiating with, with Henry Kissinger or something. I can't do this. And so later, when the museum said, what could we do for you? I said, could you make 2 photographic copies of Breaking Home Ties? And one you saw on the wall was a photographic copy. The other one I rolled up and sent to Ross Perot.
That was awesome.
And said, you always wanted this painting, but here's a photographic copy. And I called him. He said, well, thank you very much. He said, I'm taking it out. We're framing it right now and putting it in my office. So now we get to the discovery. Now it's April 6, 2006. And now the word's going out to the world. So I said, I better call Ross. So I said, I called him up. And right away he says, you've got some story going on up there, don't you? I said, yeah, I do. I said, look at it this way, Ross. You own one of 2 photographic copies of a replica painting of Breaking Home Ties. Well, he said, I'll tell you what, I'll take it to Sotheby's, we'll sell it, and I'll split it with you. And it was just, and I have letters from Ross Perot and so. So there's an interesting trail of letters and so. But to answer your question, yeah, exactly. What if we sold it?
Oh my gosh.
That would be, I don't know where I'd be if I'd sold it then. I mean, I'd be pushing pencils out on the street or something because someone would sue the death out of me. But what if we sold the place? What if we bulldozed down? You know, you can imagine all those things. And what's so incredible is that painting remained in perfect condition. No mice, no varmints, no nothing. So it's extraordinary.
Yeah, even if you had done demolition, decided you were gonna
Yeah,
expand.
Exactly.
so
Before you
many.
just
Yeah.
throw that sledgehammer in.
That's right.
Jeez, so crazy.
I'm sorry, we could probably talk all afternoon about this if you want, but when your father was so guarded about, he wanted that painting to stay in Arlington and he wasn't gonna, when he was talking with Ross, was Ross wanting to buy the, forgive me, the forgery or did your dad have the original on display at the time? I mean.
Well, my dad knew the difference and
Yeah.
he was always talking about the original.
Yeah.
And my dad would never try to sell a forgery, of
Yeah.
course, but I think that I think Ross he got in some of the letters. Finally, Ross wanted to come up to the studio and take a photograph, have his top-notch photographer take a photograph of it, and so he could have a full-size, copy. And I don't know how my dad hedged around that. He didn't want anyone there, including, and my dad was funny because, of course, during the Vietnam War, Ross is the guy who loaded up planes full of Christmas presents and gave them to the soldiers in Vietnam. He was an extraordinary, man to do. He did incredible things. So I had a different picture of Ross than my dad did. My dad didn't, he just was guarded with everybody. So it didn't, whether it was Ross Perot or whoever it was, it didn't pan out. But it was, but that's one of the more famous guys who won.
Well, last question for me anyway. What has happened to your dad's copies of all of these works of art?
So what happened was a few years ago, have you ever heard of the National Museum of Illustration in Newport, Rhode Island? Well, if you go to Rhode Island, go to Newport, you've got to go to this thing. You'll be blown away. And a woman named Judy Cutler owns this along with her husband, Lawrence. And it is one of the beautiful homes on Bellevue Avenue in Newport. And it's loaded with illustration art. Loaded. And they are so amazing. If you went down there, they'd be posing with you, taking pictures. They just make you feel like home, you know. And it's just it's a small museum in a sense, but extraordinary stuff. So she called me and she said, "What are you doing with it?" I said, "I don't know, nothing really." And so I brought all these replicas and the originals, except the Rockwell, and she put on an exhibit down there. And then so they framed and we exhibited. And then we got the big idea of doing traveling exhibits. And so we sent it down to Huntsville, Alabama. There's another beautiful museum there. And so we did a couple of those. And then, and right now, it's in my storage in the studio. And I would love to have a place to hang it, you know, so people could still see the story. Well, I was just telling John earlier that we were in the process of buying the Catholic Church in Arlington. And the first up is going to be an exhibit of Norman Rockwell and the Four Freedoms in the old rectory house in Arlington. We're hoping to do that in September. But along the line, it may open up an opportunity for me to also display this set. I also, just before COVID, I went to Southern Vermont Arts Center. And of course, I was all geared up for last summer. We were gonna do this extraordinary. We're gonna do it at Southern Vermont Arts Center, the Rockwell House in Arlington. We're gonna have all kinds of stuff. And of course, everything blew up on us. So it's unfortunate, but this is actually our first time out talking about it again in public, and I think hopefully we can build momentum around that story and have fun with it.
I can't believe we were so lucky to hear this.
Exactly.
Wait, just told 4 people about this.